having this facility going, and thanks to Bob, who I've known since the mid '80s.
Yes.
Man, we keep fighting for the arts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right.
So I, I wanted to start off with just some basics, uh, and it's and it's going to be about how it's going to be about learning, and it's about how I and I think a lot of other artists just like learn to do the things they do, and it's like an experimental, it's like an ongoing experiment. Sometimes it seems like a marathon, like made out of sprints. But there was a situation. I did an artist residency out at Johnson County Community College um, over the fall, and there would be high school students classes coming through to like look at the show, and if I was available, I'd speak with them. But I got a lesson from from some 17-year-old in the class about like what is it that I'm like really doing, and so I was giving some introductory remarks. We had a question and answer session. So the kid is like leaning up against the glass of the building there, and he said, "Why would you put something in your show that's not done?" And it's like I have never heard anything like that before in my life. And so it's like there were at least three things going on with that, and one of them was, the I felt like first of all that I was a little bit like the situation with the Wizard of Oz, and I've had the drapery pulled back, and you find out that, like there's no wizard there. It's like maybe I've been fooling myself with my practice, and maybe it's not what I thought it was. That was my first impression. The second impression was this didn't happen simultaneously. It's like still happening. The second impression was, well, maybe the work was so open ended that allows this kid to be part of the creative process. Maybe it's not like a hermetically sealed work of art, and so there's some open-ended qualities there that allows the audience member to step in and complete the piece themselves. And then the third thing is that when is an artwork ever really done? So it's like I've been fortunate to work over such a long period of time that the work that I'm making now informs the work that I made like 35 years ago. Like something clicks and you go, oh, that's what that's about. And it's a real privilege to be able to be in that situation. And so, in that sense, what that young artist said was really about the truth. And we just have like one thing that we're doing. That's our practice, and it's a little bit like each decade might be the stanza of a poem, and maybe each visual artist is like working for that last line on a poem where stuff gets wrapped up, and we just don't know what that situation is. But I'm going to talk about this piece a little bit and the learning process. It's a sheet of cardboard unfolded, and it's covered with house paint, and then all these little dots are transfer print. And so these are all from National Geographic magazine with acrylic matte medium dropped on the color printed page. I put it on there face down and let it dry overnight, and then I scrub off the paper, and the ink stays on, and it carries the image with it, or like the fraction of an image. It's so they made maybe like six of these or so, six similar pieces, and then a friend. Um, that's a different part of the story. So I began to like. to see what each of these little dots were about. And it's like they were carrying information besides the shape of the acrylic matte medium and the color, but there were also fractional images in there. And so it was like just one of those things. Well, why don't you try this, which is what these little guys are about. And so this is like a new part of an ongoing series, but it's like this is the same process of a drop of acrylic matte medium on the page, and it dries, and then like I soak the whole page in water, and then I, like with an X-Acto knife, I'll pull that little dot up, and so it carries the image with it, sort of like that silly putty stuff from back in the day. And then I get to like move it around. I get to change the context of that image around, and so it's all about narrative, and it's about like repurposing the original document from the National Geographic, and it's just about trying to figure out what happens when artists do this. What happens when artists put like one thing next to another, and it's sort of like following a recipe that you don't know about. Um, that's that's been a fulfilling part of my career, just because I know where all the work has come from, but it's just like I don't know exactly where it's going. And so when I get surprised by like something like that, and when it comes when what I learned from there shows up here, I'm I'm hopeful that what I'm learning here like shows up somewhere else. And so that just really speaks to like the artist process, and I'm holding firm to that. But then the other situation about the other artist, Kai Anderson, who's a friend and a painter, came to the studio one day, and she wanted to know what I was actually doing with color. Um, she was challenging me in a way to see what else the work could do. And at the time, I had been more concerned with like the shape of the mark and the spacing. Like I was just as concerned with what the context of this white shape would be as I was about that. And when it reaches some kind of stasis or some kind of like fruitful balance, that's when it stops. But what she said about me, and it gets back to the learning process of like, what are you doing with color? I began to like ask myself, well, like, what am I doing with color? And so that's turned into a whole new like body of work that like are more painterly, more they're not painterly, but they act like a painting, and they're kind of textile related. And so I just feel like that's something else that I'm going to be able to step into. Um, but it's an exploration situation. So I know there's a lot of artists here, so maybe there's some Q&A or comment or anything like that. Yeah, Deanna. That's another one of those good questions. It was because um, we had those around in the house a lot when I was a kid, and it kind of let me know that there was a bigger world than my rural kind of situation in East Independence, and it inspired a sense of wanderlust in my mom, and it inspired that same sense of like wondering what what else is out there. you know Plus in general the artwork was so good, and so I would like copy paintings in high school from the National Geographic photos. um, the other thing is, there's there's a more recent narrative about the National Geographic, which is, that it's like the flagship of Western civilization, often at the expense of so-called second and third worlds. So, that whole narrative is all the way through National Geographic, and uh, part of that is I can't admit to being concerned about that in the 1980s, but I do think about it now and have been thinking about that for a long time. It's like, how do we change around the context of what we know? Is there some way we can step in and add to that narrative? Uh, it's been around me. National Geographic's like it's a base material. Yeah.
I have a follow-up question to that. As you're kind of going through and taking the shapes of it, are you being intentional about how you're cutting it out, or is it more for like color composition rather than the actual subject matter?
Over here, well, there's actually like no cutting out. It's following the shape of the ink or the acrylic matte medium. So it's more of like it's a squirt shape. There are other shapes that are like drawn and more considered in some of the other work, but this one is just like about dots. And I keep thinking about the relationship between. I mean, this is abstract, but it's not, because we could see a pattern like that in a creek bed. So there's some relationship between abstraction and nature that I think gives a lot of people permission just to not be concerned about, like the mountain range, for instance, or the salamander, but like what made the mountain range or the salamander. So that's kind of a weirdo answer to your question. Yeah. Yeah, Bernadette.
I'm kind of curious about why the base is cardboard. Is it just because you're just trying to immediately get it to making it, or is there
Yeah.
some purpose to that?
I think I want to, I've got a little bit of a philosophy about that. Our job as artists is to transform the materials. That's one of our jobs from those base materials that we acquire. Um, the National Geographic is a base material. The glue is a material. The house paint on there, the cardboard, they're all like elements of the collage. But when artists work on their materials and they elevate it from one condition to another, then I just feel like that's a metaphorical for situation for how we want to elevate ourselves. It's like, this is like how I'm lifting myself up. But it's like, how do we all do that in our own process? And so I think that's one of the reasons behind the cardboard. The other thing is the whole, like it's sort of an aesthetic about found materials, or um, other things like that just sort of like challenge us in a way. So like, well, make something out of this. And so I consider it a little bit of a challenge to just bring that up from its former situation to this situation.
Garry, I was
So,
wondering.
yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
No,
Yeah. Following up with that idea of like elevation of the material, and sort of with the mark making, I feel like with this it's sort of like you find the tip or the end through that mark making. And
yeah.
And I'm just wondering, what about like, was there a specific texture or image or like transfer that you get excited about, or that sort of moment of discovery that keeps you like returning to this over and over again?
Well, I return to the process over and over again. I think I don't return to the object that they make over and over again. I just feel it's like a pretty organic, evolving situation, but the transfer printing process, these really simple verbs that I employ to make these things is what is going to carry me through to the next body of work. It's frustrating in one way because even though when I made this body of work and started it in this group in 2020, I thought I'm going to be able to do this for 10 years, 15 years. I thought it was like that fruitful for me. But the process moves along so quickly and something else comes up and you just have to follow it. So, I don't know about that. I do think that this has some lessons in painting for me, mainly because if I get to a place where like the white shape is roughly balanced out with the colored shapes, then it becomes one thing rather than something on something else. And that's valuable to me as a painter. Mark.
I was just wondering about what what you're doing now to explore color perhaps differently than you did 10 years, 20 years ago.
Well, those big pieces that I've been working on with the little colored tabs,
Yeah.
they came directly from this. But then I have a couple of pictures of I've got a couple of pieces at home from the late 70s that are a lot like the pieces I'm making today. And it's like, it's like being if you do it long enough, you get to be your own mentor, like in reverse. So I think I'm going to close up and I'm going to be like hanging around, but I wanted to introduce Robert. Robert has been inspirational to me, not only as like an arts administrator, but also as like a fellow artist. Uh, every one of your pieces brings up images to me about what your poetry is about. And when we make these visual things, they inspire words in other people. So I think we're like kindred spirits like that.
Right. Yeah.
Yep.
Great.